Loud. All right, Dr. Gayle, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation about journaling. I don't know that I've shared with you where this came from for me, but I think that could give us some context for my interest and why I reached out to you about your journaling practice personally, professionally, in the classroom, as well as in your own creative practice. But you know that I direct prestigious international fellowships, or I co-direct with Dr. Andrea Lewis, who directs the Student Success Program also. Over the years, what I was finding, and primarily it happened for me last year, where I would see that students would have wonderful experiences that they could list on a resume. But when they went to tell a story about those things by creating a personal narrative, they could do very little with what they had experienced other than repeat it. So the personal narrative really just became a framework for retelling the resume. So that instead of stories, you got lists. So I thought, well, I mean, because, I knew that there was more to the student than what she could list. But the trick, I thought, was to try to get them to actually tell that depth and understand that people were actually interested in that. So that inspired me to create a journaling club inside of the honors program. And a part of the sort of point was to flag this habit of listing and not storytelling. So the first thing we did was invited Holly Smith because I gave them these journals, and then I had sort of said, okay, the first theme is going to be about the body. So we have Audre Lorde's papers, and Holly talked about Audre Lorde's journaling practice and how from her journals we get the cancer journals and, other kinds of things. So, as a very accomplished creative writer, I was very interested in your relationship to journaling, and how you came to it, its relationship to diary writing. What is your story with respect to journaling?
Okay, thanks for asking me to do this. I love any opportunity to talk about bookmaking, writing, journaling, all of it. For me, it was part of my exploration of storytelling. And I was always writing as a kid, but as a diary, this is what happened today, this is how I felt. So I always liked that idea of pen to paper. I got obsessed with paper as a kid. But when it became in earnest was in the graduate program at University of Louisiana Lafayette, where I got the doctorate. And my writing mentor, no, he's my writing mentor, but he was just the workshop professor. He wanted us to keep a log of our stories. And so I started to think about it differently than he's just a repository of all the things that we went through that day, but now it's pointedly a writing log. So from then, like, it was what, 2014. So I've been keeping a writing log for all that time. I would still keep a journal, because I feel like it's an opportunity to expel feelings, to interrogate yourself, to understand what you're going through. You don't know what you know or what you feel or what really is at play unless you start to write it, at least for me, when you start to write it down. So the journal writing that led to drafts of stories, led to what I'm working on now, a novel called My Name is Sweet Thing. It came through journal writing. I do want to show you.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see if I can pull that up. But yeah, so for me, that's where that started.
Well, because I'm also interested in you saying the difference between a writing log and a journal, how you're making that distinction. Yeah, what's the difference
The
between what the writing
difference,
is like?
the difference is that a diary is you just expelling whatever you're feeling, or I mean, it's really not something that anybody can dictate what you do with it, how you want to. Maybe it might be even a commonplace book where, they have commonplace books where you want to learn about something and you find bits of information and you glue it in, and or it might be where you write a poem. So pretty much you can do anything with the let's say a diary, but with a journal, you are doing something more pointed as it relates to, I want to develop an idea or I want to create a product. I suppose a commonplace book would be similar in that way.
Mm-hmm.
That's the difficulty sometimes in differentiating it. The way that I make sense of it is
Mm-hmm.
that a diary is more a personal exploration of just your feelings and yourself, whereas a journal can be more pointed in creating a product at the end or helping you
Yeah.
create a product toward the end. So that's
Yeah.
how I use it with my students too,
Okay.
you know?
Yeah, I mean, like, because I think I've had to make the distinction for students between a diary that they imagine as private and locked, and it's
Mhm.
sort of formal in its address, like dear diary, right?
Yeah.
It's sort of all of this emotional unpacking. Whereas to your point, like the journal is kind of where you are trying to make sense of something. And it
Yeah.
might be like, 'cause sometimes for me, I'll come across an idea that now I understand may not be the entire thing. It's a piece of something. And I
Mhm.
want to capture that piece because I know it's going to fit into something later. So, like the journal is where I record that thing, but it can
Mhm.
be other people could see it,
Right.
not a like a, it's not private and personal in that way.
Right. And I think too, there is a there's a separation, I think, for how I deal with it with my composition students and with my creative writing students. I don't necessarily get that issue with my composition students because the journals are so particular to what we're working on for that course. Whereas with the creative writing students, I try to have them treat it as a tool toward their exploring whatever prompt or idea that they're thinking of writing about in a creative way. But sometimes, like, you might find they say, all right, I'm going to put these two pages together because I don't really want you to see this part. So there is that element where
Ah,
there is that crossover in their mind, but
hmm.
they know that I will have to see it. So I
Okay.
think it helps them to know that somebody else is going to see it. They're
Hmm.
going to be able to look through what you're doing. And so it's not uber personal,
Okay.
unless maybe you got carried away one day and you don't want
Yeah.
me to see that. But generally,
Yeah.
they know that anybody can read it.
Well, what's the difference between what you're asking the first year student to do, like the composition student that may not be defined as a writer? They might not define themselves as a writer. And what you're asking, because it almost sounds like they're doing the thing that you expect people to do with the journal, as opposed to the confessional thing. Is that right?
I think because I um I'm trying to have them think of journaling beyond just me giving them prompts.
Okay.
And but then right now, what I feel is that they think of it as an assignment. I'm trying to make
Uh,
them see how it is integrated in what they're doing. Because, for instance, with composition students, in the beginning, I asked them about their writing process when it
mhm,
comes to general writing assignments. How do they approach it? And it tied in with the lesson about the writing process and the stages that we go through. But I wanted them to interrogate their own writing process. And so
mhm,
they know that they have to explore that. And then there was another instance where I asked them to um, explore a personal experience based on the reading that we did.
mhm,
So there is a personal narrative about somebody talking about home and belonging. What
mhm,
did you connect with? You
mhm,
know, so things like that where they're always calling back to the assignment, but also thinking about their own, because ultimately they will have to write a personal narrative. So if they start the process where they start to think about their own experience, and we talk about it in class to say, they say, well, my life is not that exciting, not a lot has happened. And I say,
mhm,
well, the more you write, the more you realize will come out in the work because
mhm,
of the prompts that we get. So
mhm,
I think because they're seeing the connection to the assignment that they're doing, um, they don't kind of stray too far from that. I do want them to, I say to them too that I'm giving you these prompts, but I'm hoping that this practice will become something you do outside of the class. I
Mhm.
definitely tell the creative writing students that because that's how I've used it. And I continue to, and I model it for them and I show them my journals and I explain to them how something came to be because I had an idea and I jot it down right away.
Mhm.
Um, and it's beginning to gel in that way. I don't know if everybody, I know that many of you, for instance, you don't love pen to paper, you prefer to type, but
Mhm.
I'm going to challenge you to try the writing on
Mhm.
paper. I even gave them books. Some
Mhm.
books I had, there was one time where before the pandemic, we would make books and so that way they would see the value of the pen to paper
Mhm.
method. And I say, you're going to do it in this class, but maybe this is something that you continue
Mhm.
outside of the class, but just humor me, just follow this think of it as an assignment at first, but hopefully it becomes something you adopt. And I do know that, interestingly, I ran into somebody in the hallway and she said she changed her major, she's political science, but she said, I remember that journal and I still have it, I still use it. And I was like,
Yeah.
what? That one person, that was really good to know.
Yeah.
So hopefully there are more who do think of it that way.
Because what do you think? I mean, because I like paper too, right? And I always have. So like I subscribe to these paper services
Yeah,
and like these fancy journals. And so the weight of the paper, sometimes the look of it, whether or not they're lines or dots or grids,
yeah.
all that matters for me. Why do you think it matters? Why do you think it matters for students? Why do you want them to put pen to paper?
I don't know. I can't quote the study, but there have been studies about, retaining things when you put it pen to paper, as opposed to it being more ephemeral when you're typing it or you're recording it that way. I know that for the students that made those books,
Mm-hmm.
it was something now that I feel like I'm invested in this process. And I also feel like they felt motivated. I tell them too, like, all right, this book,
Mm-hmm.
this is my um novel writing journal,
Wow.
the fifth volume. And for me, I figured out that it had to be like this kind of paper that I tea-dyed. Because for
Yeah.
me, it gave me that writerly feeling and it became special.
Mm.
Some people they say I prefer thin lined or like bold lines. I tell them think about those kinds of things because it motivates you to write.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. I used to teach students that that was the importance of school supplies, right?
yeah.
Like you got a new pen, you wanted to use it, I
Yeah.
mean, so I get what you're saying. I mean, because a part of what it can do is inspire a kind of an authentic relationship to this thing.
Mhm. Yeah.
To your point about an assignment, when they think about it as an assignment, it's sort of like this artificial requirement that is for you.
Right.
And so what you're suggesting is that like with the pen to paper even, it's about understanding that developing a relationship to this practice that you're developing is about cultivating a sense of who you are.
Hmm.
And that there's a way that sort of arriving to the computer may mute that part of the process.
Yeah, and I also appreciate too that they're of a different generation where they have access to this kind of immediacy and of technology, and they have this comfort with it too.
Mhm.
And so I feel like in some ways I'm trying to bring them back to a time where this was the option, but also not just as this is something that isn't a lost art or anything like that, but the value of it that they may not have tapped into because they have access to. Let me
Mhm.
just type it. It's quick and it's fast. And one student did say that she tends to type, to write slower than she thinks. And
Yeah.
so that's why she prefers typing it. But I also say you can marry the two, because how I use it is when I have an idea and I jot things down and I free write, when it becomes viable in my mind, I can then say, all right, let me type this out now and let
Mm,
me see where it goes. But I still see it as part of the process. So if it's not
yeah.
like solely what you work on, I try to make that, compromise with them and say, you start it out in your journals and then you type it and see.
Yes. Yeah, because for me, like I've started using audio a lot.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, like because the text to speech has gotten so much better.
yeah,
And then I'll have my phone. So because sometimes for me, it's literally the rhythm of how I'm hearing something in my head that I'm trying to capture.
yeah,
So I'll try to get it out. But sometimes what'll happen is it's like, that rhythm isn't right. So what I now do is I'll say, and I was thinking this, and it sort of sounded like bop, bop, bop. And I'm back to what I wanted to say, which is so that I literally can capture, try to satisfy myself,
yeah.
not censor myself. And as I've gotten better with it, what I've realized is I can get all of my ums and I never erase. I'll strike it out, but then I print it.
Okay.
Because to your point, I still want the paper.
Yeah.
I like the way it looks when you write on the paper and you've got
Mhm.
all the things. So it satisfies me sensorily,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know? So, what do you like in terms of when you say, like, I want them to do this, what is your ambition for what you want them to achieve with this practice?
I want them to be able to capture in the moment something that has inspired them. Like maybe if there's a trigger. So outside of here's the assignment, you have to write a personal narrative. And so far you've written the opening scene as a free write, which was timed and you couldn't edit yourself until the end. And
Mm-hmm.
then now you use that toward the beginning of your essay and you expand on it and you continue. And now you're typing the essay and all of that. But I want that when outside of the class that you have an idea or something else occurs to you, that your impulse is to write it down. Your impulse
Mm,
is to start the process there. And so as part of the idea generation, as part of continuing to explore their creativity. So part of it for the assignment, but also beyond that, if they have to think about other things that they have to write, because I know many of them have to do portfolios at the end of the year and all
mm,
kinds of different classes. Those of you are still thinking about what minor should I do? Should I become a writing minor? So maybe in a way to kind of woo some of them into that kind of track as well.
mm,
So ultimately, for idea generation, um, accessing their inspiration and knocking things down, and also for creating other projects aside from what they have to do. Well, that's
mhm.
the hope.
Yeah,
Maybe I do want them to create the assignments that I give them and see the connection. And I always say it's not busy work. I hope you're seeing the correlation. But beyond that, to cultivate a practice for their writing life, right?
yeah, yeah. Because I mean, as you're saying this, I'm thinking about what it would mean if you don't write with awareness, right? I
Yeah.
mean, like, because sometimes I'll say to students, you can't really be a good witness if you
Hmm.
aren't paying attention to the scene. You don't know how to acknowledge your own awareness.
Yeah.
So it's important to recognize what it means to see so that you can know, like, what might this person be experiencing?
Yeah.
What does that mean? What should the record say? Right?
Yes. And also to think, what do you think about something? I mean, for necessarily that you jump into or you join a conversation without first interrogating what you think. You
Yes.
definitely have to observe and listen and be aware of what's happening and really be looking at what people are doing and trying to decipher. So a lot of the work that we do when it comes to people making their argumentation and so on, is not just to say, or can you function, or can you identify rhetorical strategies and talk about things that appeal to you, but also, what do you think?
Yeah.
What do you think? Have you thought about this issue?
Yeah.
You know, are you so outside of just creatively, but also developing argument? And some of them have said, I never actually thought about this, you know,
Yeah.
but no, you have to start thinking about it because you're writing about it,
Yeah.
and then you can be coherent about what your ideas are.
Because you're also saying when you journal, you slow down.
Yeah,
you know
yeah,
and I'm also thinking about what you're saying because it sort of helps to explain for me why then the writing doesn't say anything because what'll
yeah,
happen, you just literally are listing some things, and I have now gotten to a point where I've told my honors comp class, like, you can't quote anyone
yeah.
because they will string quotes together to the point where the quotes are supposed to say everything that they should
Mhm.
be saying. So what I'll say to them is, because you've just put this person's voice together,
Right.
didn't have any space to tell us what this means, how
Yeah,
you understand this, how it serves the argument. And once you can do that, that's when you have voice, you
right.
know? So they don't have that if you've just ventriloquizing.
Yeah, it was like even for some of the journal prompts, we would watch a video of a TED Talk that would
Okay.
relate to our theme. And it would be something like, because in the comp class, I have three themes like home and belonging, Black women and identity, literacy and identity. And so I think there was one speaker talking about her creating what you call it, a survey about, people touching our hair, like how many people actually try to touch your hair as a Black woman and what that meant and intrusion. And I think she also did an experiment by going around and touching white people's hair and just like how they react to it. And but her discussion about it, she incorporated her survey data and all of those things. And I asked them to interrogate, what is she saying? What did you relate to? Also, do you think it's sound argument and all of those things? So if they were to use what she had to say, it would be couched in what they had to say about it in response. So I'm hoping they're seeing that connection, because we just talked about that yesterday, where you mentioned about a number of things that they're saying that is sort of a list summary of code as something to avoid. So I kind of show
Right.
them in the text to say, it can't just be, this is what the person said, and this, and then that, and then why are you bringing it up? What's your point?
There you
So
go. Right.
yeah, so I'm hoping that they see that, and when they start to make those connections, that they're realizing they're not just reporting,
Yeah,
you're presenting it for a reason.
that's it. So when you do the journal prompts and they respond, you could,
Yeah.
like, well, and then what do they submit? Do they type up their journal entries? How does that part look?
During the pandemic, it was electronic, because I
Okay.
love to, like, for instance, I went back to the handwritten.
Mm-hmm.
And just to make their life easier, I got them the composition books. I'm like, I have a bunch of these, so you don't have any excuse to say you can't get another book, right? Um, so I found that it was easier for them to submit the journal when it was during the pandemic electronically. There were a few people who said, I prefer to write. And I
Okay.
said they can scan those and upload those as well. So I allowed both. But for this semester, especially for the creative writing students, we have tried to tell them that the journal should be on them at all times. So when they have
Mm-hmm.
ideas, they can jot it down or whatever. So I just recently collected all of them. So I have all of these, right?
Mm.
So I just collected
Wow.
uh,
Wow.
because yeah, I wanted them to always have one place where they have these ideas and they can flip through and look back on some of the things that they've said, because they have plotting in it for their ideas of what they're writing for their personality. Now they're thinking about the issue that they want to explore for their proposal argument. And So what do they think about it, right? So yeah, I prefer, I'm gonna, this is the first semester that I mandated hard copy, drop it
Hmm.
through my door,
Wow.
back in the old days kind
Yeah.
of thing. So
Yeah.
before they would just upload it to Canvas and I'll see, because I do have some like, yeah, there was one student scanned it and uploaded
Hmm.
this here and stuff. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, I thought you were going to show it to us.
Yeah, how do I?
Can you just
Oh,
share?
yeah, okay.
Mhm.
I thought, okay.
Okay.
Right. Okay. So,
Oh, wow.
so this was somebody who I think this was a creative writing class though. And it started out in all my classes,
Hmm.
regardless of what it is as a writing class. I asked them what the writing process as the first prompt. Then
Okay.
I asked them to be intentional. This
Hmm.
semester, I asked them to write a statement of intention to say how often they're going to write, where they're going to write, when they're going to write, and so that they would have a system. Because I tell them, one person was saying once a week. I said, that's not enough.
No, that's right.
That's not enough, right? So for this student, she said, like, before bed, I'm drawn, she writes before bed. That's when she's drawn to it.
Mhm.
I want to be more intentional. I plan to write every night before bed for at least 10 minutes.
Mhm.
So, so that kind of stuff. I think this was the creative intro to creative writing class where
Mhm.
she was jotting down ideas for her poem, you
Mm.
know, exploring those things. This was a Villanelle and the other
Is
thing.
she the one using
Oh,
different colors?
what's that?
Is she the one using different colors?
Yes.
Okay.
This
All
is
right.
all her,
Oh, good.
and she just scanned it. One thing though I do, because with the workshop classes, I always ask them to journal about that too, because workshop can be a kind of tense experience for if it's the first time for people. So, you know, it's a way for them to kind of decompress from that, but also share what worked,
Mhm.
in that. And I try to use the method of asking students what worked craft-wise and what doesn't work, as opposed to I personally like or I personally
Uh,
don't like, because that
okay.
doesn't help if I
Yeah.
just personally I don't like stories about grand grandmothers who giving, I don't know, whatever
Yeah.
it is, if I have some random thing that I don't like, but that doesn't help the person if that's what they want to write about.
Yeah.
So that's why I do it that way, and we talk about that too.
Hmm.
Oh, this was the other thing too. Like, so this was I think this was for the composition students. What has been your writing process, and how do you like to change it? And so a lot of the other prompts are about how they're interrogating what they're reading and how they relate to it and how they reflect on it. Yeah, this is what the one I was talking about, Don't Touch My Hair, this author, how they responded to it, you know, and exploring her use of strategies as well. So I think hopefully they're seeing the connection beneath between the two. What was the other one I wanted to show you? Right, this is which one is this? Yeah, this is for the fiction students.
Hmm.
And I've had them write letters to the the their character. No, to them as their character to themselves as the
Mm.
author. Because I got that as a prompt at a writing workshop where you have to think about your characters as real
Yeah.
people. So if
Yeah.
you are writing the story and maybe let's say you've come to a crossroad and you're like, that's one way you can get through writer's block, is to kind of write a letter as the character. How would the character sound? Is the character angry? Is the
Mm.
character going to say that you're not covering certain things? And that was such a revelatory experience. I let everybody do that now, where they
Hmm.
asked, I think that was one of the last ones.
Hmm.
Yeah. Here, yeah, so to get a better sense of your character, write a letter, have the character write a letter to you, the author. What would the character be urging you to say about her story? Are there questions overlooked? How would the character sound? And I also posted a letter that I wrote from that workshop so that I get a sense of of what I meant as
Mhm.
well.
Yeah, Morrison talks about that in Home. I mean, right, like, I mean, that basically is the structure. I mean, the character is
Yeah.
talking to her, you know? So yeah,
Okay.
that's great. So, I mean, um, do do you think that from this, your students have a greater appreciation for process? When I encounter students who would define themselves as creative writers,
Yeah.
they often sort of they present themselves as if process is always about inspiration.
Right. I think they're trying, I think they understand it now
Hmm.
as I've said to them, writing can be two extremes where you sit and, it's like the heavens open up
Hmm.
and inspiration comes to you and you're just writing like you know, no problem, no hiccups. And
Yeah.
other times, writing is like you have a pickaxe in a very, very arid, like dry,
Hmm.
and you're digging and digging and digging. And that, you know, the in between is you have to create your inspiration, meaning that it comes through process. It comes through that first prompt of, I intend to write every Tuesday and Thursday at this time. I'm going to sit here. Usually they have prompts, but if they don't, I'm going to continue. I tell them sometimes when they're writing to stop at a certain point where they know what's going to happen so that they have continuity. But either way, it comes with you actively working on it, and you can't wait for those moments. Those moments are great because
Yeah.
you'll be just doing your normal Monday washing dishes and you're like, oh, I know what I need to do, right? But
Yes.
that doesn't always happen. So you have to use the journal this way
Yes.
to explore it.
Yeah. And so can you tell, do you think you can like match how well the writing gets based on what they do in their journal?
I'd have to let me think back to it, the other classes. I think yes,
Mm-hmm.
where what I've seen that works is when they free write and then it's something they continue.
Mm-hmm.
And because they have started, and it was not like something that they had to start cold, it
Mm-hmm.
was something they could develop,
Yeah.
right? And because it's something that they started in a journal, they keep working on it, then it goes to workshop, we give them feedback and they go back to it. I think that that kind of process drastically improves the work
Yeah.
um, that way. The only way is if somebody is just not willing to
Mm-hmm.
work on it
Yeah.
and or ask themselves questions, because for instance we just had workshop yesterday and students were, and I always have a section where we say after we talk about what works, to make kind of bolster the person, see what's going on, what they don't have to worry so much about. It's to ask, what questions do you have? And there are so many instances where students will say, I have a question about this, and the participant will be like, I never considered that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
because of that, they can go back now and continue to work on it, tinker with it, with that in mind to say, not just that you must change your whole work for one reader, but if they ask a question that helps them to see what they're working on,
Mhm.
it helps. So it all connects.
Yeah.
I guess I'm saying that journaling is a part of it, but it's an integral part of this whole process.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I mean, because sometimes, I say to students that sometimes for me, the most compelling question is, why do I care about this? Why does this keep coming up for me? And so
Yeah,
I'm trying to figure that out. So having that appreciation for questions,
yeah,
what can drive the writing. But the thing that I'm often trying to get students when we're working on personal narratives to understand is that like they imagine that a story, like it sort of is a kind of once upon a time. And when they
right.
get their narrative voice, and the car was blue and the sun felt warm. And you're
Right.
like, so what? Like
Yeah.
like what, why do those details matter? And if
It's
you
like, yeah, it's like one of the texts that I've used in the past is by Michael Cardus. He said in one section, like there are three rules to writing. relevant detail, relevant detail, relevant detail. So if it's not, if we don't, if it doesn't matter and you're just up, sometimes you can offer information for texture, you know, so
Mhm,
we can properly visualize it. But if it doesn't really function, don't
mhm,
spend, you know, any time developing that. Only focus on the relevant, so that
mhm.
when you ask, like, what's the point, you
Yeah,
know?
what's the point?
Yeah.
Well, in your own, like beyond your teaching and in your own writing practice,
Yeah.
how many journals do you keep, or how many do you keep
Oh,
going at one time?
yes. I love showing this because people who don't necessarily understand, like this, when I did a presentation about the creative writing, the collection of short stories, I showed this, and this is like what volume, I think doesn't show all the volumes. But these are my journals I keep. So if I'm working on, sometimes I'm working on a number of them, like maybe two or three, and I'm simultaneously building them at different times. I have to make notes of things in there. And then now I realize, having so many volumes, that I have to catalog certain things. It gets kind of complicated. I'm not recommending this to anybody, but this was mine, where
Yeah.
I know this was the first one in 2014 from that graduate class. And I've
Mm,
kept it going because, and all of them look the same because, as I said, that's just my quirk. I like the old look, you know. Um, and as I said, something I used to record ideas, and like when I write through writing blocks, writing as archiving, you know, I keep fragments. Sometimes it doesn't work out, but I don't always ditch the
mhm,
idea completely. So that's a place where I can keep it and look back on it.
mhm.
Yeah.
Now, are you
So
keeping these, like, are they like different parts of the same work, or you're doing them consecutively, continuously?
consecutively, like
Okay.
the writing log is my way of, all right, now maybe this can help. Because in the beginning, like this is something to, like, sometimes when I conceive of it, it doesn't get completed that same year.
Right.
But continue to work on it. Most times I'm not working on more than two stories at a time.
Okay. Okay. Got
Sometimes
you.
one, but lately, because of teaching and other obligations, and I
Yeah.
realized that I might get an idea for this and I jot that down, and I might be working on two things at the same time. So
Mhm.
when I conceive of it and when it's completed, it varies. And so I keep tabs in my journal. So I'll write a journal till its completion and start a new one. But let's say that Motherland, I have to look back on something that I wrote then, I can continue it in the next one. So I don't
Mm.
always go all the way back, but if I have notes about it in previous journals, that's my system. You know, some people have a lot more, a better straightforward. They work on one thing. That's why for the novel that I'm working on, I keep all of that in one thing because it's a novel as opposed to a story and so on. I keep the novel together. Um, and just, I think I have about, what did I say, 5 volumes like this. Yeah,
Wow. And
that
you're
that
making these, right?
what's that?
Making these, your journals?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I realized I fell into like a junk journal,
Mhm.
um, like YouTube group I saw, and I was like, oh, what is this? Because I like to buy books and journals and so on. And I realized, oh, I can make that. And so I learned by watching YouTube videos and
Mhm.
created it that way. I don't know if I don't think I pulled it up. Uh, I do have a YouTube channel that,
Mhm.
where is it? That, um, so, all right, so I had to okay. Come on here. Sorry. No. All right, I didn't, yeah, so like this, here is
Wow.
a journal that I made from, I'm gonna mute it so that, just to show, like from scratch. And
Mm.
I've shared it with students, like there is I've shared it with students who I like demonstrated, and let's say they weren't in class, I show them a video that I made in
Mhm.
place, and then the sewing
Yeah, because
part.
yeah, I was like, yeah, I was wondering if you're sewing, if you're gluing, both.
Yeah, so I glue the covers and then I sew it using where is it? Wax thread. So I
Hmm.
had to learn that. I didn't know
Yeah.
there's a wax thread and you use craft needles that they're bigger and thicker and you use an awl to punch through, or you can use thumbtacks to, I told people you don't necessarily have to go out and buy, or you can use what you have to create that. And I do think I have a picture of students. Like, so this was 1 year that
Mm,
we made,
cool.
we made them. Um, this was, I think, just before the
Oh, really?
pandemic.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow. Yeah.
yeah. So,
Yeah, because I look
um,
at some of those, and like, 'cause, those, like in Japanese culture, they do such wonderful things with paper. And so,
yeah,
like, I have fallen down that rabbit hole so many times.
yeah.
And,
I want to make it more sophisticated because I mean I have to sew it right in the spine, but this is like my
oh,
style. But
yeah, yeah. Well, they look good. And
thank
so
you.
then, like, how long between you making it, writing it, reflecting on it, and getting it typed on a page?
Oh, it depends on the story, but I think once I have a first draft. Or well, no. Once I feel like this can become something, so it's not always, let me say that, I guess technically, or give an example. Um, let's say maybe it takes me 3 days of writing on something, and I say, oh, I think this is something that I understand now. I'm going to type it. And
Hmm.
then when I type it, I keep printing it out. And like you say, with putting little edits on it, I like that part too. And then go back to it. And it can take between 3 weeks
Hmm.
for a completed story with the whole process, sometime to years. Because if we
Mm.
go back to like, let me see, I can't see when this thing is there. Um, Yeah, for like it, if you, I share this as an example of how it can't be something to say standard because for
Yeah.
Melba, it was conceived in 2015 and published in 2016,
Yeah.
right? But the
Hmm.
longest one was a story that I started as a novel. I wrote a complete novel in 1998. I
Mm.
completed in 2004. And then I started as a short story in 2018 and finished it in 2018. So
Mm.
because I said, this is kind of juvenile, but I
Mm.
like the characters. So I'm going to
Mm.
make it a short story. And
Hmm.
that happened fairly quickly, but
Hmm.
it came through a long process. So it all depends on like Reunion, something I started. So it took a few months for
Hmm.
that one, but there are others. So it all varies
Hmm.
as well. And I do say to students though, because I know that they have a timeline. When
Hmm.
I say with this, it means then that I have kept working on it. But could I have had a draft? I did. Like for Motherland, I did have a complete draft in 2014,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Right.
But the ending didn't sit right with me. I kept working on it. So I said to them that in the course, you can complete your story within the given time. You can
Hmm.
also continue to work on it,
Yeah.
tinker on it. It might be ready for submitting. So we do have a section where I tell them about publishing opportunities, what the protocol is, what to expect, and
Hmm.
a whole lesson on rejection and dealing with rejection, so that they understand that this is something that they can continue to work on. It's not going to be like a quick turnaround, and each piece is different.
Hmm.
So it all depends. So hopefully they understand the value of this. I tell them, we have Aunt Chloe
Hmm.
submit at the end. If you feel like it's ready,
Hmm.
submit, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. And so then do you have like private, you have space for private writing as well?
Oh, like you mean like my writing life outside of,
Yeah, like so, like there's stuff that goes for your professional publications that you're close
okay.
to, but then do you have a place that's like a commonplace journal?
Oh, yes,
Mm-hmm.
yes. I
Hmm.
I do have a person because you're asking somebody who loves making books and is like obsessed with it. So I do have a personal journal
Okay.
that's not about writing because for me, I discovered that the value of keeping a diary, let's say,
Hmm.
is valuable in the same way that I think that keeping a journal that's pointed and particular to what I'm writing is also important. So I do separate it that way because I
Yeah.
see the value of both.
Yeah.
Um, and
Yeah.
yeah, so I haven't what I realized though is that I'm not as focused on the personal journal as I am on I'm religious about the writing log, but I'm
Wow.
not as religious on the personal journal. Because it's one of those things where, and I'm glad you mentioned that with diaries, like it's private and you don't want anybody to see it. But this one has sort of the more rigor and it's more external, and
Hmm.
that sometimes it does keep you from putting stuff down on paper,
Yes.
you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, and that's like, so for me, what's happened is that, like, I would say that the audio stuff can be like a diary for me because you can lock
Yeah.
it. And I
Okay.
the idea of expelling, like this idea that like I'm literally like getting it out of my body, like the words carry whatever the thing is.
Yeah.
Less concerned about it being found, if you will, because
Okay.
locked behind my passcode,
Right.
another lock, you know. So I'm less concerned about it. Whereas like I like not feeling inhibited to kind of work out the professional idea that'll be
Right.
systems of domination and oppression and that kind of stuff. It's more a part of my public writing practice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Right, like so with all of your classes, like even for like a Caribbean literature class, would you do
oh,
a journal? Like, would you have students journal there?
I'm so glad you asked that. I almost forgot about it, but I said, let me put it on my desk before I forget. No. I can stop. Oh no, there is something on here.
Mhm.
And then I'll show you this. Where is it? All right. Oh, that's not it. This. No. I found that what works for the literature classes is more communal journaling because they do have to, what I use with the questions that we have in class is more for discussion. So they all have to respond. And I discovered that the value of Canvas is that if they write it in their books and maybe they're not so excited about it, they might not share it. But if they're told they have to put what they've been jotting down on Canvas and we all can read what their commentary is and it starts a discussion, that works that way. So I don't have them keep a daily journal or anything like that. I might modify that in depending on what we do because I'm going to be teaching Caribbean Lit again in spring. This was my first time teaching it here
Mm,
last semester. And so what I did is that for the literature that was particularly, that had very difficult themes like, sexual violence and so on, is that I often have students write to the characters. What would
mm,
you say to the characters to kind of interrogate that? Or what do you feel the character would need to hear from another one that may not have gotten the agency, that may not have gotten an apology or some
mm,
closure. So it's their opportunity to explore it by
mhm,
writing letters. And so
mm,
for this one, it's from Breath Eyes Memory. And so I said, what would you do? Is there any character that the main character, Sophie, should write to? And one person said she could write to the daughter
mm,
because it's a whole legacy of, trauma. And here is it ends with this young daughter and are
mhm,
they healing? And so this is, something that one student wrote. The other, another one was you were writing to, oh, that's the one. sorry.
Hmm.
The Why is it the only one that we're seeing? Ah, okay.
Mm.
You're writing to Sophie now
Mm.
because you're saying, what would you say to the character as somebody who has read? So you're writing as yourself. And
Mhm.
so that was, I think, one way. And so why I say communally is that I put it in a book and I
Yeah.
sold it. And so they had access to see what other people said. And I think it helps for it to be kind of tactile and not
Yeah.
just on a screen. I also
Yeah.
did it in another class when we read this book,
Uh-huh.
Girl with the Pearl Earring, because
Yeah.
she's illiterate. So
Yes.
she couldn't write letters. What if she could, you
Yeah.
know? So
Oh, that's good. That's good. Well, and then also like one of the like it's helping me to understand why like I've never explored discussion boards. And mostly it's because I don't like the way they look. Like it's just a
okay.
flat screen. But I like what you're suggesting because you could like literally write it and then post it, you know,
Yeah,
and share the
yeah.
screenshot. Because that's what I was going to ask if students ever use images. Like I use ephemera, tickets and feathers and
Oh,
all
I
kinds
don't.
of things,
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah.
you know.
Okay. You
And
mean like mixed media?
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And so, and again, I like the texture of it. So, like I like having a button or, like a chipboard piece
Yeah.
or stamps, I like that. It has texture.
Yeah, with the discussions, most of them are just like they typewritten, but
Hmm.
like other things, for instance, with the Caribbean Lit class, I told them that they could add a creative feature to their literary analysis, and some people had images of art relating to it. Some they've created art. One wrote a poem, and it was a poem, but she decorated it, so I felt like that was one way for them to connect with material outside of the norm,
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, because sometimes fonts can do that for me.
Yeah.
So like now I've been into Calibri Light for a while.
You're in what?
I like Calibri Light font.
Oh,
So
okay.
that allows,
Yeah,
like, but for like if I'm writing for the president, for
right.
some, like a draft for her,
Yeah,
for fellowships, I'll use Times New Roman.
right.
But for myself, it might be a different font.
Yeah, yeah. I always feel like are we kind of forcing students with that? Because with MLA, it's Times New Roman, but even some of our email has changed the font to
Yeah.
a different one. It was Calibri, but now it's a different one. And
Now it's a
like, maybe
different one.
we should allow them to change the font, but
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know,
And I do, you
yeah,
know, because I think like, sensorily, it matters about your relationship to the stuff that you're writing.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
I let that go because I do like Georgia. I like that. That's an elegant font too.
yeah, yeah. I like that too.
Mhm.
Books.
Well, this has been a wonderful conversation. You've inspired me a lot to think about the different ways that I can bring journaling into the program as well as
Yeah.
into classes. So I greatly appreciate you and your
Thanks for
time.
having me.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I'm going to stop the recording now.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Unless there's anything you wanted to add that we
I
may have
can't think
missed.
of anything. I can't think of anything.
Okay. All right.
All
Well, I
right.
appreciate your time. So let me just
Thank
stop
you.
this. Thanks.
Okay.
Okay.